Well, good evening and welcome to Summer in Nashville. I'm Alan Jackson. You know, there's rarely a day off for members of Congress. They're either in Washington or back home in their districts, still working and listening to their constituents. There are plenty of issues on the local level, town halls with voters, meetings that happen face to face. Well, Ohio Republican Warren Davidson, he does it all. And you can tell by the issues he takes on as the chairman of a powerful House subcommittee. Welcome back, Congressman.
Nice to join you. Thank you.
Well, it's refreshing to see what you're doing on behalf of the people of Ohio. A lot of it would work nicely here in Nashville as well. The right to fix your own car was the first one that caught my eye. Most people aren't aware, and I'm one of them, that car manufacturers have been building their vehicles in such a way that only the dealers can fix them. It's a big, expensive problem for us, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a big deal. And, you know, the cars collect a massive amount of information as well. So you're also protecting your right to access your own data, frankly. And sometimes the car makers are monetizing that data, selling it everywhere. And then when you've got a neighborhood, community garage that repairs anything and everything, they're locked out of the ability to do a lot of the service work.
Well, is it true that this Right to Repair Act could also be applied to fixing military equipment at the base and in the field during deployments?
Yeah, I was talking with the Secretary of the Army, Dan Driscoll, about it, and they have contracts that the primes are basically holding them captive for service contracts. So even when you've got people forward deployed, they want to have these contractors who come out and, oh well, we can't let the military fix it, but get it into a depot and we'll, in the safety and comfort of wherever that depot may be, do the repair. So the military has to absolutely have the ability to repair their equipment, and they can work to design that into future contracts, and shame on them if they don't. But fundamentally, we should change the law. When you buy something, you should own it, including the code necessary to provide the maintenance on it.
Well, I think it's worth pointing out that this Repair Act bill has bipartisan support, but even with that, it hasn't gotten final approval. Tell us what happens when the lobbyists come in and stop the progress. How does that work, and what can our viewers learn about how to get things done when they want them done?
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. As you would imagine, lobbyists for the original equipment manufacturers, car makers, Ford, General Motors, Toyota, Honda, John Deere, pick your place, General Dynamics, Lockheed Martin, they all want to keep the system that they've got because it generates a lot of revenue for them and it gives them a lot of control. And when you want to pass legislation, what you find is it's like a lock, and you have to click each tumbler. So you can be right on policy, but you also have to get the politics right. And a big part of that is just making sure the public knows, hey, I really care about this. And they put pressure on their member of Congress, because in the absence of that, the lobbyists are paying attention to it. And they're getting on people's calendars saying, you don't want to move this. And even when it has a lot of grassroots support, a lot of times you'll get captive the leadership, and it will never make the agenda in the appropriate committee, or even if it gets through that, then it won't get a floor vote. And I was really stunned when I was talking with Secretary of the Army that, I wouldn't agree with Elizabeth Warren on very many things at all, but she actually agrees on this. So there's an odd coalition here. And I do think that you look at how are consumers best protected, it's by having the ability to, repair their own vehicles. And surely a lot of people will still choose to use dealers, but the ability to use somebody else or do it themselves is really fundamental. And I think this law needs to pass.
With so many big businesses out there, we often lose track of the fact that it's small business that employs almost half the working people in the country. According to the head of the Small Business Administration, they just got a big boost. Listen to how Kelly Loeffler put it.
These small business provisions, including making the pass-through deduction permanent, will unleash Main Street, including adding 1 million jobs, $750 billion in economic growth, not to mention what it does for working families.
Well, tell us how the small businesses in your district of Ohio will benefit.
Well, look, I can tell you firsthand. I started a small business in 2002 and grew it, acquired several others, and I was in manufacturing. And this is a huge deal. So people think of different kinds of businesses, and the big ones are all publicly traded, generally C corporations. But most businesses are closely held, small businesses. They might have a handful of shareholders, or often just one person or one family member that that operates them. So they're incorporated where it's taxed sometimes as ordinary income for the person, and being able to treat this in a way that you're not double taxed at the corporate level and the individual levels, a huge alignment for business. And this was first passed in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act in 2017, but it was set to expire. So it would have been a massive increase for small businesses if we didn't fix it. And some things that did expire that we were able to repair, when you buy assets, equipment for your business, say a machine, it normally gets depreciated over a long period of time, and you've really parted with the cash. So what you'd like to do on a tax basis is treat it as if you expended the money this year, because on a cash basis, you did spend the money this year. And that drives a massive amount of investment in our economy when people can just, instead of paying the IRS, put it into equipment that helps grow the business. It does great things for our economy. And it does that on research and development as well. And the other one is interest. A lot of times banks want people to take out the loans. And so they like the idea that you can't really expense the interest because it keeps you needing more money. But the reality is you've parted with the money. You're not paying yourself with it. You're paying the interest. You're paying for the research and development, paying for the equipment. Those are all huge wins for small business.
Well, on these topics, you seem to have a real advantage. Before you got to Congress, you spent 15 years in the business world. We also have a president who spent most of his career in business. Can you tell us what a difference that makes having a decision makers with real world experience before they get to Washington?
Well, I'll tell you, just, signing the front of a paycheck is a whole lot different than signing the back of a check. And on the other side, when you're personally guaranteeing the loans and the debt, you can't say a business owner isn't an optimist. They believe things are going to work out somehow. And you're confronting challenges day in and day out. I think people don't really realize how much burden business owners carry for the success of the business, because there are a lot of families dependent on that paycheck and that opportunity. So it really shapes everything you do. And in my work on the Financial Services Committee, I've dealt with banks, on the regulatory side, because I dealt with banks when I needed access to capital. And what we found is, there were people in Basel, Switzerland coming up with regs that our bankers and our central bank and our bank regulators were forcing onto the market. And it was really changing the behavior of lenders. And so, just having lived that experience is a whole lot different than having studied it or read about it.
Well, before we leave Washington, President Trump just announced a big effort to clean the place up and to stop the spreading crime. We see a lot of headlines about carjackings, muggings, and other crimes. Can you tell us how bad it is out on the streets these days and whether you agree that it's time to bring in more law enforcement?
Well, yeah, look, even in the most basic libertarian formulation of don't hurt people and don't take their stuff, someone has to enforce the law, right? Because, if all men were angels, we wouldn't even need a government, but they're not. Ever since Cain and Abel, people have had a hard time living with the don't hurt people mandate. So someone has to enforce the law. And in D.C., they haven't been doing it. And you've got out of control crime. You've got teenagers roving in gangs, assaulting people, stealing cars. I have had, I've got a staff of about 15 people. I've had 2 staffers who've had their car stolen, and a third who had his car broken into and cut on the neck by someone threatening to do far more to him just to get away with stealing. So one of my colleagues had an intern shot in Northwest D.C. just this summer. So the crime is out of control there. It's not just, near Capitol Hill. It's scattered throughout the city. And they're not enforcing the law. And look, it's hard to understand how they wouldn't do this, but I think for some of them, they want the discord that comes from not enforcing the law more than they want order. And for the nation's capital, at least, that can't be an option.
Well, Congressman, we'd like you to stay for another segment. There is a lot more to discuss. And for those of you watching, you can jump in now at ajnow.com. Share your thoughts about our discussion with the Congressman. The email button is on the upper right side of the homepage. I'll be right back. I'd like to extend a personal invitation to join us for our Culture and Christianity Conference. It's September the 19th and 20th on our campus here at World Outreach Church, just outside of Nashville. We've chosen 3 specific topics to explore with a wonderful group of guests. We're going to talk about the church and our expected impact in this culture, the media and their impact in our culture, And then finally, our health, how we can be healthy in the midst of all these competing voices we're hearing. The real goal is how we take our faith and integrate it in our world so we have better lives, stronger families, and strengthen our nation. Join us for Culture and Christianity here in Murfreesboro. We're back now with Congressman Warren Davidson. He represents Ohio's 8th District. He's not just an elected member of Congress, but a successful businessman and a man who served his country in the 101st Airborne Division. That's not far from where I'm seated right now in Nashville. And now he's brought his common sense experience to Washington, for which we are all benefiting. There's a big issue that surfaced with banks that you're trying to fix. Certain big banks have been discriminating against people and businesses, not because of their assets, but for political reasons. Well, that includes President Trump, the First Lady, and many other political targets. They've been debanked, as it's called. Well, for Senator Tim Scott, it brings back bad memories of when banks chose their customers by race. Listen to how he put it.
This is like the modern day redlining. You remember the redlining, black and white back in the day? Mm-hmm. Now, redlining is red and blue. Think about the first iteration that we saw. It was the gun manufacturers that said, we won't bank you anymore. Oil and gas, we won't bank you. And then they moved to the Trumps. They found themselves in disfavor with the left. Mm-hmm. These elitists who believe they should decide who gets access to our financial institutions.
You're on the Financial Services Committee, so how are you trying to address this?
Yeah, well, this was called first Operation Choke Point back in the Obama administration, and it did apply to gun makers and others that essentially the Obama enemies list was targeted. And then under the Biden administration, they did the same kind of targeting, pro-life Catholics or the Trump family, or crypto industry was broadly targeted. And it's essentially, as Senator Scott was saying, it's just a modern version of, you're not going to bank those people, are you? And of course, those people is really just the common denominator. It's a political enemies list. And Democrats have done this for a long time. Republicans are working on legislation to end the ability for choke point style regulations to happen. And part of that is just the massive power the bank regulators hold over banks. It's coercive in that nature. But on the other hand, some banks are voluntarily doing this. Bank of America had a request from a federal government, but not a mandate, not a subpoena or a warrant or anything. They just gave over all the bank records of anybody that made a purchase in D.C. Near January 6th of 2021. And then they further filtered that data to say, let us tell you who bought a religious text like a Bible or guns or ammunition. And they didn't have a warrant or a subpoena to do this. I don't think a judge would have given it because it was massive and sweeping in its scope. And so this is all done under the auspices of the Bank Secrecy Act, and we urgently need to reform it. So as you would imagine, it breaks down on party lines whether you really want to reform this. And then Republicans are a little divided in terms of how far to go on reining it in, but you can't deny it, that it's happening.
Well, Congressman, here's another issue that I'm sure matters a great deal to the folks back home. It's called the Payment Choice Act. It's another bipartisan effort that would require retailers to accept cash payments for anything $500 or less. Some people never want to use a credit card, and it's a problem that affects not just shoppers, but small businesses too. Will you tell us what you're doing to try to get something done with this?
Well, kudos to John Rose, who's a Nashville area guy, Tennessee guy in the House, and he's leading this bill right now. We've worked together with a coalition of Republicans and Democrats to get this done. And look, all of our money on it says legal tender for all debts, public and private. You ought to be able to hand cash to somebody for anything for a retail transaction. And okay, fair enough. You want to buy a $70,000 F-150. People might look at you a little funny if you were handing over that kind of sum of cash. But if you go back when they first set in the kind of $10,000 surveillance limit on cash transactions, that would be $82,000 in today's money if you adjusted it for inflation. So since then, they've had this war on cash where, even in a lot of places, you can't even use it. I mean, I love watching, the Reds and the Bengals, but at their stadiums, you have to use a credit card. And so, the idea that you want to hand, your son a $20 bill and have them go get a hot dog and a Coke. You can't do it. You don't necessarily want kids running around with credit cards. So you should be able to use cash. And when you use cash, it's really just between you and the person you pay. So this is one of the things that a lot of the big government people, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, like, is when you use any other means of payment, it creates a record, and it can be audited and surveilled. And so who spent this money? Well, if it's cash, it's hard to say who spent it and what they spent it on. But if it's a credit card transaction, there's a record of exactly who bought what from whom. And a lot of people say, well, that just keeps us safe. But when you take it to the next level, it really can become a tool for coercion and control, because it definitely can be used for surveillance.
Well, one last quick question. What do you think's on the horizon with Russia and Putin?
Well, I hope peace. You know, President Trump's been very clear that his objective is to restore peace, to stop people from dying in a war that shouldn't have occurred in the first place. And so, you know, President Biden really had no mission. He just said as much as it takes, as long as it takes, which isn't defining what success is. To them, success was as much as it takes. Keep spending the money, keep the war going in a lot of ways. They wouldn't even engage in dialogue with Russia. And I don't know how you broker a peace when you won't sit down and talk to the parties that are at war. And so I think President Trump has a shot at doing that. Putin, not a good guy, but I will say I don't think Zelensky's a great guy either. So hopefully, for the sake of the people that are dying, the leaders that are leading this war agree to stop it.
Well, Congressman Davidson, thank you for your time today and for getting us up to speed on a number of issues that will benefit quite a few people. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for talking with me. God bless you and all your listeners and viewers.
Well, in a moment, some reasons for hope in a busy season of change. I'll be right back. Hey, I want to give you a personal invitation to join my podcast, Culture and Christianity.
For a person to think that the Bible is not political, you don't know the Bible.
We're trying to understand how to take our faith outside the walls of the church and live it out in the marketplace.
He will show you what to do, whether it's in our communities, in our country, or other places in the world.
So I brought in some friends, some people that are trying to do this.
How could anyone call themselves Christian and be pro-choice? Is beyond my comprehension.
But I think he wanted them open and in need of him every day.
We have been living through a season of unprecedented deception, propaganda, manipulation.
Everybody says, oh, Israel is attacking schools in the Gaza Strip.
I want to be a part of seeing culture and Christianity intersect. Hope you enjoy the podcast. You know, I've used this reference before regarding the theater of the absurd. We've watched lots of releases from that theater of the absurd, and the hits just keep coming. The same voices that said Trump is an existential threat are now encouraging violence against ICE officers, even associating our fine men and women in law enforcement with members of Nazi Germany. These are the same influential voices who condemned the January 6th violence, yet didn't say a word when the attacks on Tesla dealerships and vehicles were happening. Folks, that's anarchy. Well, now we find out that even the largest financial institutions in our nation, corporations that are celebrated as trophies of capitalism, were canceling relationships, debanking accounts, discriminating against certain people and businesses for political reasons. Well, back in 2021, in the aftermath of January 6th, a bank closed then President Trump's personal accounts, which contained millions of dollars. The bank also publicly called for him to resign from office, citing it was a quote, in the best interest of our nation and the American people. Well, why does this matter? Well, if financial institutions didn't even hesitate to go after the sitting president of the United States, it's easy to envision a scenario where we as Christ followers might be targeted just for our biblical worldview. Now, I'm grateful that the current administration has shined a light on this debanking problem, but I want to stress that the solution to society's ills, they're not political. I've talked to church leaders across the country, and I've heard this repeatedly, that there's a lethargy that has come to our nation. There's been a greater appetite for entertainment and a much lesser appetite for engagement. We as Christians have to repent for sitting on our recliner with our robe on saying, "Go team." It's time for a different attitude and a time for a different response. If we'll do that, I promise you there are reasons for hope. We'll be right back with your emails. Thank you for spending a few minutes of your day with us. If you ever miss a show, just a reminder, you can find them all. They're archived at ajnow.com. Makes them easy to share with a friend. Thanks for your emails. They're always a highlight. Sophia from Broad Channel, New York said, "I'm so grateful for Pastor Allen's brave biblical proclamations and perspective. We need it. We've all gone down the road of quietening down and going along to get along. Pastor Allen has been helping me refocus on not being silenced. Hopefully now at my current age, more wisely, because Christ has to be first." Well, amen to being more wise with our responses, Sophia. The Lord will help us. And a viewer on Facebook noted, "Your video messages have motivated me to speak up myself. Never been politically involved, but we're in a different place right now. I believe a lot of people feel the same way. I don't think we have the luxury of being quiet anymore. It's time for us to speak up and give our brave president the support he deserves. He's risking his life, and we saw proof of that with our own eyes. To pull back the curtain on our fraudulent government, the very least we can do is support him." You know, as unsettling as the fraud and the deception has been, I believe there's a note of hope in the midst of that. Once we see the reality of our condition, then we can begin to navigate towards a better place. Without a good diagnosis, you can't make the adjustment to get healthier. I believe God's moving. Then Gail D. from Washington emailed, "How do we persuade those who listen and believe the fake media to watch and listen to the true narrative?" Well, I've got a bias on this one. I think it starts in our hearts. So I want to share the good news of my faith with them. I think if we have a heart change, then we'll have a completely different recognition of what the truth is. I want to thank you all for taking a few minutes of your day and spending them with us. You know, together, being advocates for the truth, I truly believe there are more reasons for hope than there are for despair. I'm Alan Jackson, and I pray you have a wonderful evening.